Hello, this is Galip Dalay, Research Director at Sharq. Today we have Nikolay Kozhanov, who is teaching at the European University at St. Petersburg. We'll be talking with him about the Russian policy in Syria and evolution of it. So it is a pleasure having you, Nikolay.
Thank you very much.
The first question, Nikolay, is we have seen many countries' Syrian policy evolving as the conflict has evolved as well too. Do we see any change in the Russian priorities in Syria?
Well, I would say that there was no real changes quite recently. So since its military involvement in 2015 and until now, Russia is pursuing relatively the same approach. While it puts its military pressure on the opposition, it tries to launch the negotiation track as well. But the negotiations in the Russian version is largely the negotiations about surrender for the opposition.
So basically right now it's not negotiation but the opposition surrendering to the regime.
Well, of course it's not the negotiations of direct surrender, but what we can see is that Russia is trying to impose its vision of the settlement in Syria on the opposition and on other
And what is the
sponsors.
Russian vision of settlements?
Well,
Russia talked about the political process. What does it mean by it?
Russia believes that the end game in Syria for this conflict and for Russia, it should look like the following. So there should be a secular Syria with a potential transitional government, the government that could guarantee the Russian presence in the post-conflict Syria, both military, political and economic, and yet at the same time it should also guarantee that whatever simmering conflict remains on the Syrian territory, it will stay within the borders of the country.
Okay, at this stage, Russia, how flexible when it comes to negotiation with the regional and international power? In the end, everyone is talking about a negotiated settlement. How flexible is Russia with its Syrian policy? To what extent it can give up on some of its priority while keeping on to the others?
Well, the degree of Russian flexibility is changing. So while definitely in the difficult times the Russians are more inclined to finding compromises and reaching understanding with the opponents of the regime, in the situation when Russia feels that it has an upper hand on the ground, like one we have right now, Russia is quite stubborn in pursuing its goals. Yet, again, we should admit that the Russian attempts to introduce so-called new Syrian constitution, as well as the recent initiative on the deconflicting zone, to a certain extent, it also incorporates certain concessions that Russia is ready to provide. Yet the degree of these concessions, as I said, is not that big because of Russia grew extremely self-confident after the regime victory in Aleppo.
Has Russia, we have talked about the framework within which Russia thinks that the Syrian crisis be settled, but concretely, what are the Russian interests in Syria?
Well, the reasons why actually Russia came in Syria, they are multidimensional. First and foremost, it's about forming a leverage of influence on the West for Russia. Secondly, it's about re-establishing Russia as one of the key regional players, the role it lost after the dissolution, after the fall of the Soviet Union. And finally, it's also about fighting the jihadist threat that Russia believes exists in Syria and may introduce certain challenge for the stability of the post-Soviet space.
As a follow-up question, and in the regional setting or in Syria, Russia and Iran always or usually comes into the picture together. How solid is the Russian-Iranian alliance or partnership in Syria?
Well, I would always be very cautious about labeling the Russian-Iranian relations, because quite a lot of my colleagues, they are usually saying about Russian-Iranian alliance, whereas I prefer the term the marriage of convenience. Obviously, Russia and Iran, they got involved in Syria because of the different set of reasons. The only factor that unites them is the interest in saving Assad and the remnants of the Syrian government. But the driving driving motives, they are absolutely different, and this difference, it definitely creates certain preconditions for the rift from the long-term perspective. Though again, we should not expect any serious contradiction before we see the post-conflict Syria and its actual shape.
So the post-conflict area, where do you think that the Russian-Iranian vision are likely to decouple?
Exactly, because first of all, Russia came to Syria, as I said, to re-establish itself as a leading international and regional power. Whereas for Iran, it's battle for the regional dominance, for its own security, and definitely it's a challenge thrown to the other regional players. So from this point of view, the goals, the final goals that Iran keeps in mind, and the final goals that Russia keeps in mind, they're absolutely different. And after they reach, if they reach the desired outcomes in terms of saving Assad, they will definitely start arguing about what the Syrian future is. And that's where we definitely see the split, especially, for instance, over the Iranian wish to use the Syrian territory as a bridge connecting Iran to Hezbollah, or especially in the area where Iran would like to put an additional pressure on Israel, a Russian silent partner in the Middle East.
Well, after the fall of Aleppo, in which Russia played one of the leading role, the major opposition stronghold has become Idlib. And now we are hearing the speculation of Russia that Idlib might be a next target for Russia. Does Russia have any military design on Idlib? And if so, what is it more likely to be?
Well, if you trace back the history of Russian presence in Syria for the last year and a half, you will see that actually Moscow is extremely predictable in its moves. So it usually tries to offer a kind of a revitalization of the diplomatic track. If it fails, you see Russians getting closer to Assad regime in its attempt to put a military pressure on the opposition. So actually the fall of Aleppo was the direct result of the failure of Kerry-Lavrov agreements that were signed last year. I would suggest that we'll definitely see the next round of violence in Syria if the current Astana talks and potential Geneva talks will fail. But if there is at least a certain progress, then we will definitely see a certain delay in the beginning of the way of violence. The only thing I would like to draw your attention is actually that it's not necessary that it will be Idlib as the next target of the regime. What I could deduce from Russian news, from Russia propaganda machine, currently Moscow is preparing, actually at least its official TV channels, they're preparing public opinion for the fact that it could be also Deir ez-Zor as the next direction of the military operation in Syria. I mean the military operation that could be backed by Russia.
Nikolay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.